April 27th, 1994. After nearly a century of racial division, inequality and discontent, there is once again hope for South Africa. 4 years of campaigning, spearheaded by Nelson Mandela, has brought about an end to the apartheid system of racial segregation, which saw more than 3.5 million black Africans removed from their homes and forced into segregated neighbourhoods, in some of the largest mass evictions in modern history. People across the world were suddenly optimistic again about the future of a modern South Africa, a country which could not only be wealthier, but fairer for every individual regardless of their race. But 30 years on from this historic day, and things have only got worse, and South Africa's modern reality couldn't be further from this dream. This map here shows income inequality across the world, and what we can clearly see is that many of the world's most unequal countries are concentrated in this southern third of Africa. Countries like Botswana, Eswatini and Namibia stand out for having high levels of inequality, but topping the list as the most unequal country in the world, even 30 years after ending apartheid, is South Africa. Its Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, has consistently been above all other countries, and means that there is a massive difference between the haves and the have-nots. For wages, the top 10% of the country take home around 65% of all available income, while the bottom half only takes around 6%. And when we look at wealth, this picture becomes even more alarming. In a country of around 60 million people, 3,500 people, a tiny fraction, own 15% of the country's wealth, a figure which is more than the bottom 90% of the country combined. What's worse is that since the end of apartheid, inequality has actually increased, as the rich have got richer, often at the expense of those less fortunate in society. When wealth and income are controlled by so few people, it leaves a large portion of the population in poverty, unable to improve their situation due to the scarce opportunities for better jobs or better education, ultimately trapping them in this situation. And it's because of this that South Africa has some of the highest levels of unemployment in the world. Nearly half of all individuals between the ages of 15 and 34 can't get a job. And what makes this worse is that unemployment is a hardship predominantly afflicted upon black South Africans. What we can see here is the unemployment rates in South Africa by region. And when we compare it to the ethnic breakdown of South Africa, the results are startling, as these hubs of unemployment are almost entirely concentrated in majority black African areas. Without the means to earn, and with such low living standards, many people are pushed towards lives of crime. And South Africa's major cities like Johannesburg have become hotbeds for armed robberies and carjackings. Making this worse is a complete failure by the government to provide basics such as power to the population, with the issue so bad that many areas go without electricity for over 10 hours a day, in a country which is meant to be the most developed in Africa. Meanwhile, major population centres are either in the middle or about to face severe water supply issues, where water provision and sanitation systems have been allowed to grow with fundamental weaknesses that are now rearing their heads, and likely to only get worse due to global climate change and shifting weather patterns. The ironic thing about South Africa's situation is that despite being so unequal, it's actually the largest and most advanced economy in Africa, accounting for around 13% of the entire continent's GDP, boasting a relatively corporate environment with cities like Johannesburg acting as a major global financial hub. So how then did it come to be that South Africa can be both so developed and so poor at the same time? And why have things got so much worse since that historic day when apartheid ended? I'm really happy to announce that this video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Chances are that at some point in your life, probably even in the last week, you have been tracked online. I know that I have, and because of this, out of all the subscriptions that I have, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, the one that I use the most is Surfshark VPN, and it also happens to be by far the cheapest. While most subscriptions cost you upwards of $15, Surfshark is just $2.49 a month, and when you split that between 7 friends and family members, it's just 36 cents per person. So for the fraction of a cup of coffee each month, I get access to better prices on products and flights that use browser cookies to make things more expensive. I get to travel the world virtually and access sites that are blocked in my region, like Netflix from another country. And perhaps most importantly, I remain anonymous online. Every minute that you spend online, companies are recording who you are and what you're doing. And even if those companies don't have any bad intentions for that data, which, let's face it, some definitely do, there's still a chance that data can be breached and fall into the hands of someone who does want to do you harm. Surfshark also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can rest easy in your purchase. So to start taking your internet browsing seriously, you can visit the link in the description, and if you use the code INVISIBLEHAND, then you'll not only get it at just $2.49 a month, you will also get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN completely for free. Click the link in the description to find out more. Like many countries on the African continent, much of present-day South Africa has its roots in colonialism. And what was once an economy based on agriculture and hunting changed in the 1600s with the arrival of European settlers. Due to South Africa's convenient location at the tip of Africa, it was not originally planned as a colony, but as a refreshment station. You see, before the Suez Canal, ships had to travel around the entire length of Africa, and so Cape Town marked a good location for Dutch sailors to restock. But what started as a refilling station inevitably gained other motives, and over the course of the next 2 centuries, Dutch settlers and then the British colonised the land. Most of the activities consisted of agriculture production and utilised slave labour, but this all changed with an event which would define modern South Africa forever. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1867 and gold in Witwatersrand in 1886 transformed South Africa's economy. And by the 1880s, the mines around Kimberley produced around 95% of the entire world's diamonds. These discoveries attracted foreign investment on a scale not yet seen before in the country, with a steady flow of migrants coming in to make use of the resources. And while the economic boom generated from these discoveries spurred on economic growth through significant infrastructure, as is often the case with precious natural resources like gold or diamonds, it heightened tensions between those looking to extract it. And what followed was a series of conflicts which culminated in British victory and the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. Mining in South Africa serves as the perfect microcosm for the broader economic disparities faced to this day, where a few mining owners, often the descendants of British and Dutch settlers, occupy vast amounts of wealth and power, often at the expense of the working population, reflective of the wider societal and economic structures that were deliberately crafted during the apartheid era. And while apartheid only officially begun in 1948, by the early 1900s, its origins were already present, as it sought to ensure white dominance across all facets of South African life. And one of the most effective tools used to enforce this were policies related to land ownership and use. Black South Africans were prohibited from owning or renting land outside designated areas, which occupied a tiny fraction of the available space. And what's worse is that the land which they were given was typically on bad quality terrain with poor agricultural potential. And much of this is still visible today, as Black South Africans were stripped of their agricultural livelihoods and economic independence, and instead forced into overcrowded and under-resourced areas, which make up modern-day townships. As a result, many black families lost their traditional means of subsistence and were thrust into a life of poverty. As is stated by many economists, one of the fundamentals to economic prosperity is the ownership of a resource, in this case land, and once this was stripped from many, it only entrenched social divides. It wasn't just land ownership that was restricted either. Apartheid policies also heavily restricted black South Africans' participation in the job market. Under apartheid, skilled jobs were reserved for the white population, relegating many black individuals to low-paid, unskilled labour, whilst laws placed on education established a separate and inferior education system for black South Africans, designed to prepare them for predetermined roles as labourers or servants. The curriculum was intentionally limited, focusing on basic skills and manual labour training, rather than providing a comprehensive education system that could lead to a higher skilled and better paying job. And this deliberate under-education perpetuates a cycle of poverty and limited economic mobility for black South Africans. And this is really important, as it's something which takes decades and decades to put right again, and if not dealt with properly, will have lasting effects far into the future. Without access to quality education, many black individuals were unable to acquire the skills necessary to compete in a modern economy. And this educational disparity continues to impact the labour market today, contributing to high levels of unemployment and underemployment amongst black South Africans. Pretty much in all areas of modern South African life, the scars of the apartheid regime are still extremely visible. White areas have far better infrastructure, healthcare, roads, and sanitation than the majority black townships. And with public services in disarray, it doesn't look like it's going to be getting better anytime soon. Broadly speaking, the key issues that South Africa is dealing with today are unemployment, inequality, and an abysmal provision of public services, particularly electricity and power. South Africa's public goods and services, once exemplary on the continent, have experienced significant deterioration. State-owned entities like Eskom, responsible for electricity, and Transnet, overseeing rails and ports, were historically efficient and well managed, with the port of Durban being among the busiest globally. However, over time, there has been a widespread collapse in state capacity, leading to failures and breakdowns in these essential services. And many South Africans have had to reluctantly adapt to navigate this new daily life, charging devices, showering before hot water goes off, and leaving the house before traffic lights fail. Schools, hospitals, restaurants, and businesses rely on backup generators to keep running, while homeless people guide vehicles through potholed streets for cash. Johannesburg, the continent's richest city, was built on gold, but it's now defined by chaos, crime, and corruption, and this mirrors the wider collapse of basic services across South Africa. A broken railway network disrupts trade, and outdated sanitation systems recently triggered a cholera outbreak near Pretoria, which means that parts of the country increasingly resemble a failed state. Whilst much of this has been caused by energy issues, corruption also has a large role in the complete inefficiency of the South African state to provide for its citizens. The post-apartheid era ushered in high expectations for improved public services amongst the previously marginalised black majority. The African National Congress, or ANC, promised better housing, healthcare, education and utilities. But in trying to secure a better future for South Africa, the party has faced many issues, most notably corruption in the form of state capture. State capture is a form of systemic political corruption where private individuals or companies exert significant influence over a country's decision-making processes to benefit themselves at the expense of the public. And this could be clearly seen in Jacob Zuma's presidency between 2009 and 2018. With the Gupta family as a prime example. The Guptas, through their business empire, manipulated political appointments, secured lucrative government contracts, and influenced the media to their advantage. And this extensive control over the state institutions led to significant economic consequences. Investors started to pour money out of the country, and the continued mismanagement of the state power company, Eskom, resulted in frequent power outages. Like most of modern-day South Africa's issues, energy problems are rooted in the past. During apartheid, infrastructure development was primarily focused on white urban areas, leaving many black communities with inadequate services. Under a system like this, energy only had to service a small fraction of the population. And so while it was deeply unequal, the companies could provide services for a relatively small proportion of the population. However, post-apartheid, as the government looked to expand access to electricity to poorer communities, the demand for electricity increased. However, without sufficient infrastructure in place, South Africa could not meet this newfound stress being placed on its public services. The country lacks sufficient generation, transmission and storage capacity, and its aging coal-fired plants are increasingly unreliable. Not only this, but the public energy provider Eskom has accumulated massive debt, estimated at around $31 billion, limiting its capacity to invest in infrastructure and exacerbating the energy crisis. To be clear, energy provision has always been an issue in South Africa for the last 30 years. However, in the last couple of years, it's gotten a lot worse. And in early 2023, the government declared a national state of disaster due to severe load shedding, where some areas faced nearly 10-hour blackouts. This acts as a major bottleneck on economic growth, as many individuals are left without basic essentials and many businesses cannot operate. And this situation further entrenches inequality in South African society. Those with financial means can afford generators to bypass national blackouts, allowing them to continue with their lives and maintain economic stability. In contrast, those who cannot afford generators are left struggling, unable to improve their circumstances. And for the economy at large, energy shortages and mismanagement of the system are also eroding one of South Africa's biggest advantages, which has historically been its reliable and affordable energy supply. Historically, South Africa has used its plentiful and inexpensive coal reserves to create a low-cost electricity system. Essentially, it could use coal instead of more expensive forms of electricity to power energy-intensive practices, meaning that the end result would be far cheaper and more competitive than from other countries. This gave the country an edge in industries that use a lot of energy, such as mining, metal production, and manufacturing. And because of the cheap electricity, South African exports were among the most energy intensive in the world. However, this is all starting to change as South African products are becoming more and more expensive. What's more is that those employed in these industries are often from poorer backgrounds and have lower skill sets than the rest of the population. Policies also excluded them from owning businesses and participating in certain economic activities, which has led to a further concentration of wealth among the white minority. It may seem like in this video we have talked a lot about apartheid and South Africa's inequality, but this is because it is fundamental to nearly all aspects of the bigger economic problem in the country today. This is because, at its most basic level, the function of an economy is to determine the allocation of resources in a group. And using this definition, South Africa is failing at this in nearly all counts. And nowhere is this more clear than with the woeful levels of unemployment. Inadequate education systems have meant many black individuals lack skills necessary to advance their economic prosperity. As South Africa's economy is getting worse and worse, fewer jobs are available, and those which do crop up are in industries reliant on manual labour, such as mining and resource extraction, both of which are becoming more automated over time, forcing more people into poverty and out of jobs. Currently, South Africa's unemployment rate is one of the highest in the world, with nearly a third of all individuals of working age unable to find a job, and this is unlikely to get better anytime soon. Growth has stagnated over recent years, making employment opportunities even harder to find, and jobs which crop up which are in service sectors are likely to be occupied by white middle-class individuals, perpetuating existing inequalities. So where does this leave South Africa? You guessed it, in a pretty bad state. The country is in need of dire reform and upheaval, but one which is unlikely to happen as political chaos still seems to have a grip on the country. And whilst many still continue to go on holiday and enjoy a beach or safari experience, what is hidden from view is the sheer poverty that many of the population live in.